Good evening, TNT family. We are fortunate to have our former Minister of Energy, uh, Kevin Ramnarine, with us tonight, and we were discussing the Petrotrin closure and the effects it has on our economy. We were addressing some of the statements that was made by current Minister Stuart Young, refuting what Mr. Ravmar said recently back in May on an article. Mr. Mirage criticized the government, and Stuart Young was refuting what he had to say, saying that Rav should come with Mr. Mirage should come with evidence, and he invented these facts. So, Kev, I want to welcome you to UNC USA for the first time. Deeply appreciate you taking the time to join us. Unfortunately, MP Indarsingh had an issue he had to attend to, but we will continue this discussion in a few phases. So, Kev, can you give us an update of what you see happening with the economy and Petrotrin, and also give us a little description of what happened during your tenure as Minister of Energy, where what you was dealing with, what you left the oil industry with, and the economic situation there. If you can give us a brief introduction of what's taking place.
Well, first of all, the decision to close Petrotrin, which was effected in November 2018, was a horribly wrong decision. It has been described to me as an industrial massacre. Industrial. We have now in Trinidad the emergence of what I call the Rust Belt. Just like how you have the Rust Belt in the United States, we have the Rust Belt running from Point Lisas all the way down to Point Fortin. And of course, Point Appear is between Point Lisas and Point Fortin. The closure of the refinery in 2018, now 6 years, the refinery has been closed. As I said, it was a massive error, and it was an error which was based on a misunderstanding of the business model of Petrotrin, a misunderstanding of the finances of Petrotrin, of the economics of Petrotrin, of the accounting of Petrotrin. It was a complete misunderstanding of the company. And that ignorance is continues to bear itself out every single time I hear members of the government speak about Petrotrin. So there were a number of pieces of propaganda that were floated around when the government was prosecuting the closure of Petrotrin. One of which was that Petrotrin was a ward of the Treasury. Those were the words used by the Prime Minister in one of his addresses to the nation when he was preparing the country for the closure of the company. What we have found out is that between 2010 and 2016, Petrotrin paid about $21 million in taxes and royalties to the Treasury. A lot of that 21 billion, a lot of that $21 billion Trinidad and Tobago dollars was paid as US dollars. We also know, thanks to a Freedom of Information request from the Fishermen and Friends of the Sea group, that between 2016 and 2018, that these are the years 2016, 2017, 2018, and so on, Petrotrin received no subvention, no money from the central government, with the exception of the year 2018, when a loan was advanced to Petrotrin to pay those workers who were being sent home, to pay off, to give the packages to those workers who were being sent home. So Petrotrin was never a drain on the treasury. I heard, and I'll say this until I die, I heard one journalist go on the radio and say the government was pumping money into Petrotrin, right? That's a journalist. She's no longer, thankfully, she's no longer with the journalistic profession. But she said that the government was pumping money, and that's to show you the level of ignorance in the Port of Spain media. I like to call them the Port of Spain media. Many of whom, don't know the oil industry or the energy sector, or even South Trinidad, right? So Petrotrin was never a drain. Petrotrin was never being propped up by the Treasury. It was all part of the propaganda. Petrotrin was a major contributor to the economy. As I just said, $21 billion in taxes and royalties between 2010 and 2016. Our LPG, which is among the cheapest in the world, our cooking gas, is heavily subsidized. That subsidy was borne by Petrotrin. Now that subsidy is being borne by the Treasury. That subsidy was to the tune of 200 million Trinidad and Tobago dollars a year. So your cooking gas was as a consequence of Petrotrin. And there are many other, of course, the company sustained about 5,000 jobs. Workers had health plans. Those health plans have now either fallen away recently. One of the health plans that they have given the workers, which the workers have to pay out of their pocket for, the premiums have been doubled, right? The retirees have been sending me the screenshots of the emails that they got from the insurance company. Their premiums have been doubled. So many of them over the age of 60 now will be without a health plan. Having worked in Petrotrin all your life with the expectation from your contract of employment that you would have had medical benefits post your retirement into your 60s and so on, many workers are now facing a future in their 60s, 70s, and 80s and so on without proper medical coverage. So it is a tragedy, and the reason why it is not going away, this discussion on Petrotrin is not going to bed, and because deep down in people's conscience, in people's soul, they know that something is wrong here, that the rationale given by the government to close the refinery is flawed, fundamentally and intellectually flawed. And I come back to again the point. I want to make this point. I'm not calling names. The top three people in the People's National Movement government of Trinidad and Tobago have no qualification in accounting, finance, and economics. Right? They have qualified in other things. But these people are making billion-dollar business decisions for Trinidad and Tobago, one of which was the closure of Petrotrin and the closure of the refinery. So how did they misunderstand Petrotrin? Well, I heard, for example, one minister in parliament saying that Petrotrin lost $16 billion in the year 2018, and all his colleagues on the government bench oohs and ahs. Like, oh gosh, that is a drain on the country, $16 billion lost in the year 2018, and all of them supporting him, right? And nobody in the Port of Spain media could call them to account to explain that. And there's a reason for that. That is an accounting treatment of a company moving from being a going concern to a company being a non-going concern in the year 2018. 2018 was the year the company closed down. And what happens are the assets of Petrotrin, the fixed assets of Petrotrin, the refinery, the platforms, the pipelines, and all these things, those things were transferred from off Petrotrin's balance sheet. Those assets were removed from Petrotrin's balance sheet and put on the balance sheets of the new companies, the Heritages and the Trinidad Petroleum Holdings Limited and the Guaracara and so on. And as a result, that is where that loss of $16 billion came from. It was merely an accounting treatment. But the propaganda of the government is that, oh gosh, look how bad things is. Petrotrin lost $16 billion in its last year of operation. Prior to that, when the company was losing money, it was as a result of the debt that was taken by the Jones administration between 2007 2009. Petrotrin borrowed 1.6 billion US dollars for the refinery upgrade and the gas to liquids project. Those debts eventually had to find their way from the balance sheet, where they were liabilities, onto the profit and loss statement as the plants that they were intended to build became operational. So when you borrow money to build a new plant, that borrowing is accounted for on the balance sheet as a liability. Over time, interest will begin to accrue on that debt, and that interest will be added onto the balance sheet as part of liabilities. But when the plant becomes operational, the interest on the loan is what we call expensed, meaning that the interest now goes onto the profit and loss statement. And this whole thing is really a misunderstanding of accounting, right? And as I said, I don't see anybody with any accounting qualifications in the hierarchy of the government. So you have what is called expensing of interest taking place. As the new plants began to become operational, began operations in 2012, 2013, 2014. Expensing of interest, significant interest. Interest on 1.6 billion US dollars. Secondly, you had depreciation. So when you drive a new car out of the showroom, we all know what happens to the car immediately, it depreciates. The same thing happens when you start a new plant. So there were 5 new plants being built in Petrotrin. As we brought those plants into operation in 2011, 2012, 2013, 2014, those plants had to be immediately depreciated. That depreciation is another expense. So you have the interest being expensed from the loans, and then you have the depreciation of the plants. You also had what is called one-off write-offs. So we had to write off the gasoline to the gas to liquids plant. That's a fact. We had to write it off because in a company, if you have something for which you have no benefit, there's no benefit that can be derived, you have to write it off. You had to write off the headquarters had to be written off. The headquarters you see from the highway, and then so that's 3 things I pointed out there: the expensing of interest, the depreciation, the one-off write-offs, and the 4th thing is that between 2014 and 2015 and 2016, oil prices were falling, significantly falling. And Petrotrin was carrying a lot of inventory of crude oil, diesel, jet fuel, and so on. And the value of those things also fell. And that too was reflected negatively on the profit and loss statement as what we call an impairment or a write-off. So all those things were happening between, let's say, 2013, 2014, 2015, 2016. It was really a manifestation of an accounting treatment of what was happening. But from a cash point of view, the company could have sustained itself. In fact, a very senior accountant brought to my attention the financials of Petrotrin for the year 2018, and he looked at the 2017 and the 2018 cash flows, and he said that the company was generating sufficient cash to meet its responsibilities, to meet its obligations, meaning it was generating cash to pay salaries, to finance its operations, and to service its debt in the year 2017 and the year 2018. So why was the company closed? So the Minister of Energy, in an editorial that he wrote, I think you all quoted in May 2024, said that it was the Cabinet of Trinidad and Tobago that pulled the trigger to close the refinery down. So we now know where the trigger was pulled, but we don't know why. So we know who pulled the trigger. The trigger was pulled by the Cabinet of Trinidad and Tobago, which is chaired. The cabinet is always chaired by the Prime Minister or the acting Prime Minister, right?
Yeah.
So the Prime Minister and the cabinet took the decision to close the company, to close the refinery. But why? And many conspiracy theories have been floated. There are some conspiracy theories floating around that it was closed to protect X, Y, and Z and so on. But this is what I believe. I believe that the government was spooked, SPOOKED, spooked by the fact that there was a bond payment due in 2019 for 850 million US dollars. So what happened is that Petrotrin borrowed 750 million US dollars in the year 2007. And that bond was arranged such that the capital and the interest were amortized over the life of the bond. And the bond may have been for 15 years, right? That's bond number 1. Bond number 2 was taken out in 2009, and that was a bond for 850 million US dollars. And how that was structured is that they were paying the interest from 2009 to 2019. For 10 years, they were paying the interest. And then at the end of the life of the bond, the capital had to be paid in what is called a bullet payment of 850 million US dollars. So by August 2019, Petrotrin would have had to find 850 million US dollars to pay the bondholders. And the bondholders are not local people, they are foreign people, right? And you don't make joke with the international bond market, right? Because if you default on a bond, you become black, you become blacklisted globally. You become a global pariah, like Venezuela, right? Because people see you as not reliable, as not credible. You can't pay your debts. So this 850 million US dollar payment was due in August 2019. August 2019, bond payment is due. The refinery shut down in November 2018. Now, I believe, and this is my point, and I've spoken to other people who agree with this position, what the government wanted was to convince the bondholders who are holding the paper for that 850 million US dollar bond. They wanted to convince those bondholders to refinance, or the terminology used is to roll the bond forward for maybe another 10 years or whatever it is, right? And thus kick the can down the road, right? And one of the ways to do that is to convince the bondholders that you have the capacity or the capability or the wherewithal to pay them. Because what the bondholders are concerned about is being paid. If I lend you money, my number one concern is that you pay me back. So they wanted to present to the bondholders a company called Heritage Petroleum, which is a profitable company generating profits, which the bondholders will say, aha, well, they can pay me back because Heritage Petroleum is profitable and we will get paid back. And what the government did, and this is a matter of public record because it was something which was raised by the Guardian, the government actually gave Heritage Petroleum a 2-year moratorium. I don't want to use the word tax holiday, moratorium on supplemental petroleum tax. So Heritage Petroleum, to make it look attractive, because they're trying to convince the bondholders, to make Heritage Petroleum look attractive, they gave Heritage Petroleum a 2-year moratorium on supplemental petroleum tax, which was not given to any other company in the oil and gas industry, right? So it was really, in my point of view, sort of discriminatory application of this tax moratorium, because that come like I telling you, you don't have to pay corporation tax for the next 2 years for your company, but everybody else have to pay. So the bondholders were convinced. Most of the bondholders were convinced. I think they got the majority. There was a threshold they had to reach, and the bondholders were convinced, and the bond was refinanced, and the government, to use the term in a sort of joking way, the government dodged the bullet payment. It was called a bullet payment, and they dodged the bullet, but the debt is still there. The debt didn't go away. What they did was to kick the can down the road. Now, when I spoke to our people who were running Petrotrin between 2010 and 2015, I know for a fact we were making provisions way back in 2013, 2014, 2015. We knew the 850 was coming. We were making provisions to pay the 850. We had a gentleman that we had hired from the United States, and he was world class. He was putting things in place. He was speaking to the bondholders and so on. They had confidence in him. He was having regular webinars and so on with the banks and the bondholders and so on. So much so, gentlemen, that shortly before we left government, Petrotrin was able to secure on its own 2 legs, without any prop from the government, a loan from an international syndicate of banks led by I don't want to call the bank name because I'm not sure 100% if I remember the name of the bank, but they were able to secure a 500 million US dollar loan in 2015. without any support from the government. And why would a syndicate, why would a syndicate of banks lend money, 500 million? Why would anybody lend somebody 500 million US dollars?
If the business
Common
was
sense,
losing money. If the
because they
business was
know
losing money.
if they knew, the bankers knew, and these were banks like Credit Suisse and so on, right? These
Right.
people don't lend jokers money. They knew
Right.
that Petrotrin in 2015 had the wherewithal, the capacity to pay back that loan. So the question is, what changed from 2015 to 2016 to 2017 to 2018 when the company went into the ground and had to be lots of things changed. There were a lot of decisions taken between 2015 and 2018 that led to the demise of the company. There's a project which was cancelled as soon as the government changed, which would have added about 5,000 barrels of oil per day. By the year 2016, that would have added 5,000 barrels of oil per day. That project was shelved, right? It's called the MOPU, the MOPU project, Mobile Offshore
Right.
Production Unit for Trinma. And do you know, they shelved that project in 2017 or thereabouts. So when a new CEO of the company came in, a new CEO of the company, a CEO of Heritage Petroleum came in, right? A fellow by the name of Mr. Wiley, right?
Okay.
He saw merit in that project and he caused that project to be operationalized. And that project is now producing a lot of oil for Trinma. The point is, it should have been doing that since 2016. And we lost
Right.
all that production at a time when,
Right.
Petrotrin needed the money. So those were some of the decisions that were made that really started the crippling of the company. So and then there was some decisions that when there were certain people in very important positions, one of which was a vice president of refining, who was well, he wasn't sent home. He left. He left Petrotrin, or he left the company and so on. And he was making great strides in turning the refinery around and so on. In 2016, I think it is in April of 2016, before a joint select committee meeting, Petrotrin's then president, Mr. Fitzroy Harewood, spoke highly about the performance of the refinery in April 2016, right? So there was no need to close the refinery down. Even if we argue that the refinery was losing money and the refinery was a loss-making refinery and so on, if a private sector company has a refinery that's losing money, they will take action to fix it. There are things you could do, but pulling the plug, putting the refinery down. Now, the refinery has been non-operational for the last 7 years, for the last 6 years, right? The refinery has been non-operational for the last 6 years. Now, what has been happening in the last 6 years? Depreciation, right? If you have an asset which has not been started for the last 6 years, and it obviously depreciates, regardless of how good you claim that you have mothballed it and blanketed it, use nitrogen blanketing and so on, there would be depreciation. So that refinery, of course, is going to be very expensive to restart. Um, the other point I wanted to make is
Just like an old
Dr.
car, I mean, a car, if you're not in
Exactly, yeah. I
use,
use the analogy. I use the analogy of a
freeze up.
car,
Yeah,
right?
freeze up.
Exactly. Now we're talking about 20, 21, 22 integrated petrochemical plants here. We're talking about rotating equipment. We're talking about boilers. We're talking about the lakes that supply water. We're talking about Petrotrin had its own power generation capacity and so on. All these things, if you leave them as good as you claim, and we don't know how good they have been preserving the refinery, right? But I mean, the refinery
How
is
can
not
how
a.
can you preserve it? How can you preserve it if you're not
But
running the machine?
the point is this: the refinery is not a vase that you put on a shelf and you say, okay, we're going to preserve the vase and wrap it in bubble wrap and put it in a
Exactly.
box. That is
Exactly.
not the refinery. The refinery, as I said, is 21, 22 integrated petrochemical plants, right? With rotating equipment and with software. Could you imagine the software in the refinery 6 years later? If you shut down a laptop, if you shut down a laptop for 6 years and you open the laptop, let's say you shut down a laptop in the year 2018, You close the laptop and you unplug it and you put it in a drawer. And you come back in the year 2024 to start the laptop. What do you think will happen? The
A
laptop is
complete
the laptop.
what do you call it? Have new updates and security updates
All
and
the
everything that will go
updates and
through.
all the and so all the software in the refinery now is antiquated, irrelevant. The other thing is this, and I will wind up at this point because I could talk whole night about Petrotrin. I have always been very proud of, the PNM likes to accuse us in the UNC of being unpatriotic. And the day somebody accuses me of being unpatriotic, I will challenge them to a debate on the history of Trinidad and Tobago, right? And I'm pretty sure I'll run circles around them. But
Then this channel will be open to you anytime you want to debate anybody.
when,
So I'm talking about debating, right? So let's take him up on that too.
well, I don't think he'll come. But when you sit on an aircraft to leave Trinidad and Tobago, when Petrotrin was operational, and I said this to the OWTU last week, when Petrotrin was operational, I sat on the British Airways 777 on the tarmac in Piaco to fly to Gatwick Airport. The fuel that was taking me for 9 hours across the Atlantic Ocean, that jet fuel was produced by my countrymen in the refinery in Pointe-à-Pierre and had to meet international standards for British Airways to say, yes, put that in our tank. And I raised that point because the certification, because we're talking about restarting the refinery here. The refinery wasn't a parlor. The refinery wasn't a rum shop. It wasn't. The refinery was a very complex international business. And the refinery, of course, operated with certification. So the Petrotrin refinery had to have ISO certification. It had to have American Institute of Mechanical Engineering certification. So there were a whole labyrinth of certifications that the refinery would have had before a drop of jet fuel could go into the British Airways 777 or into the Boeing 747 and so on, or to fly your family to New York and so on. It was Petrotrin workers from the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago that was making that happen. So the certification is lost. The software is irrelevant. Rotating equipment, we don't know the state of it. Is there equipment missing? I'm hearing talk that things are, in Trinidad and Tobago, gentlemen, I don't have to tell you, things tend to disappear, right?
Exactly.
So I'm hearing talk about things that might be going missing and so on. So therefore, restarting the refinery after 6 years of it being shut down and so on is expensive. However, I want to ask the question: did the government of Trinidad and Tobago, the cabinet of Keith Rowley, when they took the decision to shut the refinery down in 2018, did they consider the economics in their economics? And I'm not sure they had an economic analysis, but did they consider the 6 years of depreciation in the whole equation? And I don't think they did. And the final point I'll make, and we have a complete half an hour. I have heard it said over and over and over again that one of the reasons why they had to shut down the refinery was that the refinery was an importer of crude. They had to import crude oil to feed the refinery because
Yeah, I'm seeing this in this article here also.
Our oil production in Trinidad was insufficient to feed the refinery, and that is true. But that has always been the case since the dawn of refining in Trinidad and Tobago. That refinery, the refinery's diet was largely from imported crude. We used to import crude from Venezuela at one point in time, from Africa. We imported crude from all over the world, right? Yeah. So the refinery would have had a throughput of about 140,000 barrels of oil per day. Its nameplate capacity was about 165,000 barrels of oil per day. On average, on a good day, 140,000 barrels of oil per day being refined in the refinery. And from that 140, about 40,000 was indigenous crude, local crude, and the rest we imported, right? That I went and I downloaded the 1962 report of the Ministry of Energy. And I put it up on Facebook to show that the refinery was importing about 60 to 65% of its diet, in its crude oil diet, in the year 1962. So this argument about the refinery was important, the crude that it was using, and we had to close it down for that reason, that does not carry water, right? So the government is going to continue to be questioned about that decision, and they will always defend that decision, right? Because as far as they're concerned, they did a great thing, right? If you hear them talk about that the
Yeah.
closing of the refinery might well be one of their top achievements,
Yeah,
right?
they
Because
saved Trinidad. Yeah, yeah.
they saved the country, and there was a former minister of energy, now deceased, who used to talk about the refinery, about Petrotrin being a black hole.
Yeah.
Exact words. We mustn't forget these things. And then there was a whole campaign to demonize the Petrotrin worker and say Petrotrin workers are unproductive and they're overpaid and so on. And all those things, if a company has issues, if a company has issues of profitability, of productivity, and so on, shutting the company down should be an absolute last resort. And all over the world, you have had corporate turnaround. People have been able to take large corporations and turn them around, right? You had in the US auto industry, you've had people doing corporate turnarounds. In the telecoms industry, you've had people doing corporate turnarounds. In the oil and gas industry. So could we not have, if there was a problem to the extent that you were concerned about the profitability, the productivity, the viability, you could have turned. I mean, after all, the PNM is self-proclaimed. They believe that they are very bright and so on, right? So there were the final point, and I have many final points tonight. Um, Putting profitability and productivity and all those things which are important and necessary, putting them aside for 1 minute, there is the strategic value of Petrotrin to Trinidad and Tobago, which is energy security. And I just want to say tonight that in my lifetime, and I am 52 years old, I think we are the closest to World War III
Right.
at this point in time. And than I think the last time we were this close to World War III was 1962, 1963,
Right.
1962, when we had the Cuban Missile Crisis and JFK and so on, and the world came close to Russia and America came close to blows, right?
Right. Right. Right.
If there is some major international war that engulfs all the major superpowers of the world, China and Russia and the US and so on, two things will become immediately in short supply. History teaches you that the two things that people will begin to hoard immediately is food and fuel, right?
And water.
We
And water.
and well, water, thank God we have plenty of that because it rained whole day today, right? We are a country blessed with 8 months of rainfall, right? But
Okay,
sometimes
but
even
can we not even we have to talk about that another time. We're not saving what most of that water that we get.
right,
Go
exactly.
ahead.
No,
Go
but
ahead.
the
Go ahead.
point is this: we have very little. Our food security is very much deficient. We import most of what we eat, right? And now we're importing all our liquid fuel requirements, right? So we have to think strategically as well as economically. Um, we have a country to run, right? We have a country to run. We have an asset down in Point of Pierre. What we have to decide what we are going to do with that asset in Point of Pierre. As far as I see, where's that asset going to be if the PNM continues or the current rate they're going? Where's that asset going to be in 5 years? Same way. So over time, the Petrotrin refinery might end up being a scrap heap.
Oh yeah, exactly. Because
It might become
everything
it
seized
might
up.
become
Yeah.
it might become the biggest scrap heap in the Caribbean, right? Then, but I know that there are people who are working diligently and so on. There are some companies that are putting some proposals, and we wish them well. But the rate at which this thing is going, it could well end up as the scrap heap of the Caribbean. Right? We don't want it to go there. What we want is we want to consider the strategic importance, and we want to consider the economic importance of the refinery to Trinidad and Tobago, and not only to Trinidad and Tobago, to the Caribbean, because that refinery also supported the entire CARICOM region, right? So that is where I'll end tonight. And when Rudy Indarsingh is ready to join us again, I'll be happy to to come back and to contribute to the program. But I think that Petrotrin is a topic which will not go away. I think it will feature in the 2025 election because the government is again going to come and try to make a defense of their decision to shut the refinery down. And well, according to them, Petrotrin hasn't been shut down. It just they restructured it and so on. Right. So yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kev. Listen, when
Kev,
you come back
Kev,
next time, we want to look at when Basti Pandey UNC government took over in 1995, the differences they made in the operation. Then we saw Malin come and start to make some changes based on party affiliation instead of skilled people who know what they were doing. Then we came back in 2010 and we kind of revamped things there with you at the helm of things. So when you come back next time, I want to go into some of this. And
Sure,
then
man.
Cho Cheong, according to what his statement is, what facts has he presented us to back up his statement, claiming that he's claiming that Ralph Maharaj inventing evidence and facts. But what evidence does Cho Cheong have? So we want to deal with this thing next time around. You come when you get a chance, and we'll bring back hopefully MP in the Sync join us before the week is finished. We'll work it out and
Yes.
I'll let you know what's going on.
Oh,
So Kev, I
okay,
want to thank
gentlemen.
you very
And it's
much.
it's it's raining heavily in Trinidad here, so
Yeah,
we'll
yeah,
chat
yeah.
again. All right.
All right, then. Thanks a lot. Thank you very much. And thank you
Okay, good.
everyone for joining us. We will continue this case conversation in more than one phase. Thank you very much. Trini, you want to add anything before we go?
Kev, before you leave us, good night, good evening.
I think
Um,
he skipped already, but go ahead. Say what you have to say.
oh, he left us already. Okay, no, what I wanted to add is that in April 2019, where Petrotrin released their accounting for their final year, and it showed that they made 1.6 billion TT dollars in profit. That was in it was on a there was an article in the Guardian on April 2019 saying that Petrotrin had a profit of 1.6 billion dollars. In addition to that, Colm Imbert recently in a meeting that they had when they were discussing, um, I think it was a joint select committee meeting when they were discussing the refinery sale of the refinery and the importance of having the refinery, getting the refinery started. Colm Imbert admitted to the public that the Petrotrin refinery was a net foreign exchange earner before it was closed. He said that publicly. There's a video clip with him in that meeting stating
Right.
very clearly that Petrotrin, the refinery, was a net foreign exchange earner, a huge net in, and it is important that you have the refinery started. That was his justification for wanting to get. I think that was when they were having that negotiations with. I'll get the clip and post it.
Yeah, and the second phase when you're coming back, we're gonna do this in a few phases because this thing there's quite a bit of information
So
we
so
need to bring forward.
Yeah, so saying that the refinery it was not making money is a huge fallacy, and they admitted that themselves. Now,
But
since
Trini, what evidence? They have not produced any physical evidence, any book accounting evidence to show us or to back up their statement what they're saying, right? So
well,
they're contradicting Ralph Maharaj, Ralph Maharaj inventing things, but what evidence are they showing to back up their statement?
well, there
You know
were
what I'm saying?
there were a few discussions which showed that after 2015, when the PNM took over and they put their new board into Petrotrin, there was serious mismanagement and corruption in Petrotrin, in the refinery, and in the oil producing aspects, the lease operators aspects, where they
Which period are you talking about now? From what
between
year period?
between 2015 after 2018 when Petrotrin was
Okay, 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 okay,
there was impropriety in the oil where they had the AV drilling scandal.
right,
In addition to that, there was the OWTU exposed in April of 2018. The OWTU exposed that it was in the newspaper. There's an article on July 1st, 2018, in the
right,
Guardian paper which outlined that there was
right,
an oil tanker um, corruption going on where there were tankers coming in, tankers that transported oil. They
right.
came to the refinery and they had false bottoms in these tankers. So they were taking more oil out of the refinery and paying for less. There was a huge scandal about that in 2018, July 2018. And there was the scandal exposed also about the fake oil. Also, that was
Yeah,
exposed.
and I strongly believe our oil has been sold on the black market, and it's been moved through our borders without accountability. I
Yes,
strongly believe that we have some of that going on. You know, some of our natural resources are being moved across through the borders,
there was also
because
diesel
yeah,
bunkering in sea lots.
right.
There was also diesel bunkering in sea lots being sold to boats for up the island. So,
Yeah, and that whole Pariak revamp, that situation was taking place. Those divers died over there. I strongly believe that was something that they were setting up to kind
well,
of
that is speculation.
reposition. Yeah,
That is speculation. But what I am
yeah,
speaking of is fact. There
yeah,
was there was a scandal about oil leaving the refinery, more oil leaving the refinery because of these fake tankers, and
yeah.
there was that situation with the fake oil, right? So
Right,
if you
right,
if you have one company saying that they were sending 4,000 barrels of oil per day to the
right,
refinery,
right.
that's 4,000 barrels less that you're supposed to be producing. So you have to import more because you're not producing the oil. You have fake oil going into the refinery 4,000 barrels every day, and we don't know if it's only 4,000. If it's just that one lease operator, there would have been others. In addition to that, the if you have oil, your refined product leaving the refinery, a tanker coming in with a fake bottom and leaving with two-thirds capacity and saying leaving with 100. I don't know how much those tankers hold. If you have a tanker coming in with a 100-barrel tanker leaving the refinery and you're only getting paid for 50, your refinery will be operating at a loss, or it will not be operating with with the profit margins that you expect.
Yeah, I strongly believe we have a long history of that kind of activity taking place. You know.
Yeah, yeah, it was confirmed. They actually seized. The police went in there. The fraud squad went in there and seized a couple of tankers and confirmed. There's a newspaper article. I'll send you the article. But if you Google fake fake tankers at Petrotrin refinery, you will find the article. I just Googled it and I have it on my phone right now.
Right, right, right. So prepare for yourself when we come back to continue this discussion. I'm going to do
Yes,
it in
the
a few.
article was on Sunday, the 1st of July,
Right,
2018, Newsday.
right,
Petrotrin probes fake diesel tanker.
right.
Investigations are ongoing to the state owned Petrotrin confirmed yesterday into illegal storage of diesel in separate compartments from the designated storage area of a tank truck operated by a private contractor. On
Right.
Thursday, officials of the fraud squad, blah blah blah, employee at Petrotrin refinery. It's there. You just Google it. It's on a
Yeah,
Newsday.
yeah.
On
I'm
the 1st
surprised
of
the
July.
police even got involved with that under this PNM administration because all this racket that's going on all the
Well,
time, you know.
they got involved, but then Petrotrin was mothballed, so everything died because the employees with the evidence and so on, with the records, would have lost their jobs. Everything
Right, right.
everything
So
got.
we have some serious auditing to do when we take government,
Well,
and
if you find
we have a lot of work. We have a
if
lot of work.
if you find the paperwork.
Yeah,
Now, another thing that Kevin mentioned, Um, when you mothball a refinery, the refinery, as he said, has a lot of rotating equipment. Anything with the name rubber will deteriorate. Anybody in
Right.
engineering will tell you your motor car,
Yeah. Yeah.
your
Yeah.
fan,
The seal will break.
the
They'll dry rot.
seals, if they remain in a fixed position without movement, all the seals would be worn. The minute you start it up, after you run it for a few hours, it's going to
Yeah.
fall
Yeah.
apart. The seals, rubber, fan
Yeah.
belts, and so on. There are pumps, there are motors, all of those rotating equipment will have to change everything and reservice and refurbish.
Right.
So
And which is going to be more
that's
costly. It's going to be more costly than if we had kept it running.
yeah. Had they kept the refinery running and sold it or leased it as a going concern, it would have been more feasible and it would have been less costly, and we would have probably already gotten a prospective client being interested in taking over the refinery. I'm sure of it.
Yeah, well, we have to put them in a position where they have to prove what they're saying. We have to really in Trinidad you could say anything and do anything without
Well, the
evidence.
forensic audit and so on will take quite a bit
Yeah,
to
yeah, but what I'm saying for now, based on what the government is saying, right? We have to put them in a position. Well, okay, that's what you're saying. But give us the evidence. Show us the facts.
well,
Show us the facts.
well, they don't admit and they are not transparent about
No,
anything.
no, they don't account to nobody.
They
From the time they
they
take government.
counter so their modus operandi for the last 9 years have clearly indicated. And if you look at the PNM history, what they did in the last 70 years, for the 52 years that they were in government, they never accounted to anybody for anything. They never accounted for anything. They mothballed the Shell refinery back in the day when there was a Shell refinery. I wanted to come in and mention that to Kevin. There was a Shell refinery in Point 14 that was mothballed also, and it became a bag of rust.
Right,
And it exists as a bag of rust. When Caroni was closed, Caroni turned out to be a mountain of rust for the
right,
different sugar
right,
factory.
right. Yeah.
And
You
all the
trying to do anything? You had to build a completely new what do you call it like for the sugar processing plant. Now you had to, if you even try to do anything, you have
you know,
to
you have, we have to start back from scratch. We are
yeah,
importing
yeah,
sugar from Barbados.
yeah.
We spend close to half a billion dollars importing sugar from Barbados. And
Right,
Trinidad and Tobago had the largest sugar factories in the Caribbean. When the
yeah,
PNM took government took over from the Crown Colony in 1956, we had two sugar factories and two oil refineries, and we were
right,
exporting sugar. We were the largest exporters of sugar. We were the largest exporters of oil, and we were also exporting things like coffee,
yeah,
cocoa, milk. Believe it or not, Nestle's
right,
came into Trinidad and opened a factory because they
yeah,
had to process our cocoa and our milk.
right.
None of that today. After 30
So
consecutive years of PNM between 1956 and 1986, we have none of that today.
right.
But we have a discussion to carry on again. It's a pity we couldn't have Kevin for a little more.
Yeah, yeah. I think I think the
But,
weather has
but
affected his
yeah, but his discussion
ability.
was quite complete and comprehensive.
Right, right. So we're gonna do this in a few phases. We're gonna address. We intend to address the diverse situation, as
Well,
much as possible.
that's another pressing issue. There was already all the
Yeah,
investigation, and that commission of inquiry determined and gave concrete evidence of um what's the right word to use without being obscene, man? Of mismanagement and criminal negligence, and
negligence.
nothing to date for the divers and their families.
Oh yeah,
Nothing,
yeah. No
absolutely
consideration at all.
one
No
cent. And they
consideration at
spent
all.
close to $22 million for that commissioner of
Right.
inquiry.
So
One,
we have quite a bit to go. We also have to address which I want to have Gary Wood in part of this conversation going forward, the effects of the the oil spill and the slothful handling of the cleanup. That Gary was here, last week talking about the effects of the toxic effect on our fishes and stuff like that. So the poor response for the oil spill cleanup,
Well,
and
well,
these are things that we have to make
that
part of the session going forward.
that whole oil spill deal too is also another questionable situation. They haven't found.
Especially the most recent one in Tobago there.
Yeah, yeah, that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah, yeah.
They haven't found the owner of the boat, but there is speculation of some ties as to who the
You know,
owner.
that alone by itself is showing clear evidence that oil moving on the black market,
Yeah,
through the borders.
the boat was last in Venezuela, in a Venezuela port.
Right.
So where did the oil come from? They haven't even identified. Every single drop of oil on the planet can be identified. There's a
Yeah.
finger, like your fingerprint. Up to now, they
Right.
haven't identified where the oil came from.
Yeah. Well, this whole border
It's
situation,
a cover up
you
of
know,
there's a lot
yeah,
of cover up of
it's
things that are going on.
yeah. Yeah, the lack of border security and the equipment shutdown there is for somebody's convenience. But yes, definitely we're going to continue this discussion, Trini. So
Yeah.
you and I we will definitely do this again. So thanks again for taking the time. Anything last thing you want to say before you go?
No, no, that's it, man. If I go
All
on,
right, buddy.
I'll
Thanks,
be like,
thanks for taking the time. I know you're dealing with some other things down there too. So we'll keep in touch. I'll let you know. We still have to get Barry back on also. So we'll keep in touch and I'll let you know what's taking place. Thank you everyone, Nadira, Gary Abood, for taking the time to join us here. And we'll definitely keep you guys updated. Subscribe to the channel so you can get an automatic update on what's taking place. With that, I will say good night and thank you everybody for joining.